remember him. A Bob Brown profile. Who was James Dean?
2020, brought to you by New...
James Dean. If he had lived, what would he be today at age 59? Would he be one of Hollywood's veteran superstars or a has-been? We'll never know. When James Dean was killed at age 24, he became, to borrow language from Churchill, a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. And although Dean's been dead for nearly 35 years, he remains one of Hollywood's most enduring and even electrifying names. Well, tonight, Bob Brown searches for the man behind the image. Who was James Dean? Here is where the journey starts and where the legend lives. I can tell there's a fan in town because it's a stranger, you know what I mean? And I had one girl said, well, she felt kind of funny walking down Main Street. She said to everyone that she was a James Dean fan in town. I said, don't worry about it. We have him every day.
In Fairmont, Indiana, where James Dean grew up, it doesn't take long to start a conversation about him.
I've got two grandkids, 11 and 12, and they're crazy about James Dean. And they say, well, Papa, tell us about James Dean. Tell us what did he do?
James Dean as Cal, the wildest boy you've ever met.
What he did was become a movie star. In East of Eden, in Giant, and especially in this 1955 film, Rebel Without a Cause, Dean defined the look and mannerisms of a new generation of post-war teenagers who were rebelling against authority, feeling restless and misunderstood.
You're tearing me apart! What? You say one thing, he said another, and everybody changes.
Jim happened at a particular moment in time when the American teenager was on the verge of a revolution.
Martin Landau and Dean were close friends as young actors in New York.
You're talking about somebody who looked like an all-American boy who had all manner of unrest inside. And Jim, I think all of us had that, but it sort of struck a note.
Come on, let's go see what we're driving.
Dean's look became part of a code of appearance for teens. The jacket, the moody attitude, the slouch, and most of all, the eyes. There was something in his distant gaze that made people want to know what was behind it. Because he died at 24 in the wreck of his sports car, that look has never aged, and James Dean has never gone out of style. His image is fixed like an icon in the public mind, based on just 3 motion pictures, a few television shows, and some well-known photographs and poses.
Hey, little rebel, we love you. We're your fans. We'll always be true.
Every year, fans who remember Dean from their past youth and fans still young who find the characters he played just as true to their feelings come to Fairmont in September, the month he died, to pay their respects at his grave. One fan was so taken with Dean that he moved to Fairmont and opened the James Dean Gallery to display his collection of memorabilia.
It's a hopefully a lasting tribute. He's the eternal teenager.
Would you describe this as an obsession, or do you have a dealer's eye for it as well?
I guess it would be an obsession. Yeah, sure.
How did James Dean become such an obsession? And was he the same to the people who knew him as he was to the fans who made him an idol? That portrait still changes, depending on who remembers him and from when. He was raised on this farm, taken in by his aunt and uncle after the death of his mother. Marcus Winslow was Dean's young cousin, whose memories are straightforward and warm.
He was just like an older brother to me, and he was a pretty normal guy. He came from a small town and an average family, and he had the willpower and the determination, the confidence in himself to push himself and get to the point that he was.
The The place where Dean gave his first public performances, the old Fairmont, Indiana High School, is vacant and falling apart now. To the woman who taught his speech classes here, Adeline Nall, Dean was far from average. He was a young genius who already had what good actors need.
His power of concentration was terrific. Going into hibernation and wanting time to himself to concentrate on the role. And he had so many little things that he added. He was so natural.
It didn't surprise anyone that he left Fairmont, first for a year of drama studies at UCLA, and then for New York, to become part of a serious young generation of actors exploring their craft.
Say, want to have more fun? Then come on along and let's join the Pepsi crowd.
One of the earliest paying jobs Dean got was in this commercial. He's the kid on the far right. It may look a little out of character from the image we know, but friends remember this side as well.
Jimmy to me was a playmate. We played in the streets of New York.
Actress Liz Sheridan shared an apartment with Dean for several months, and they were joined by a third roommate, writer and producer Bill Bast.
We spent a lot of time in the park, and we used the bullfighter's cape that he dragged around with him. I was a dancer at the time. I liked to dance in the middle of the street, so we would always wait till the street cleaners would come, and it was 6 o'clock in the morning, and we were always dancing.
He could be really a stinker and get into a lot of mischief and behave badly, but it was half the time, 90% of the time, it was affectation. It was trying out a scene on you. If he met someone new, there was an intensity that was unbelievable. He screwed into your eyes, and he stayed there until he got everything out of your brain. It was like that.
And he knew how to use what he got. Martin Landau remembers Dean gleaning advice on how to play a TV role he was rehearsing.
You're just a dirty old man in a dirty old hash joint. You're not God.
One particular role, Jim really didn't have a handle on this rather explosive young man who seemed benign and then would kind of explode. And while we were talking, he took his collar and put it in his mouth, which was a habit of his.
I thought you were my friend.
I looked at that and I said, that's your mother's breast. His mother had died when he was very young, and emotionally, as well as visually, it was a very interesting idea. And he said something like that, and then ran back to NBC. And he did that several times on the show, to great effect.
Joey, he's trying to help. This guy wouldn't help a puppy out of a puddle. He takes those.
So by the time he moved west to make East of Eden in March of 1954, Dean had begun to develop an extraordinary talent. This screen test for East of Eden shows how Dean could hold the screen just with his eyes, projecting a range of conflict and emotions that didn't seem to be acting at all.
It's all the money you lost in the lettuce business.
He was so new to Hollywood that he lived on the lot while he played the role that made him a star.
I made it for you.
Cal, you will have to give it back.
No, I made it for you, Dad. I want you to have it.
Dean did have a rebellious streak, and it came out quickly in his dealings with studio executives. This telegram from a Warner Brothers publicity man describes Dean as impossible in dealing with the press and concludes in telegram lingo he needs good scrubbing behind ears. His new income, $10,000 for East of Eden, was large enough so that he could indulge his Indiana-bred passion for racing by purchasing a Porsche.
You've won a few races, haven't you?
I won 2.
Just as he completed filming Giant, and a studio ban on his driving in race cars was lifted, Dean was featured in a public service trailer for auto safety that was one of the last times he appeared in front of cameras.
Take it easy driving. Life you might say might be mine.
On September 30th, 1955, Dean was on his way to an auto race, driving his Porsche toward a dangerous Y-shaped California highway intersection. A second car turned in front of his from a fork in the Y. According to a passenger in Dean's car, his last words were, "He's got to see us." In During his 24 years, Dean had fused together elements of a small-town upbringing, a New York bohemian existence, life in the fast lane. He was moody and nonconformist, charming and studious, still too young to pin down. When he died, the image that would be made from those elements passed out of his control. What determined that image most powerfully was the release only 4 days after his death of Rebel Without a Cause. That timing and the publicity that followed it seemed to settle the legend of Dean as the rebel. That was the one dimension selected to represent an otherwise complex personality.
Now, I mean, Jim is basically a picture on a T-shirt. I mean, it's gotten, with each generation, the person has gotten more and more lost.
And because James Dean would never grow older, the image of the young rebel was one he could never betray. His likeness still comes off the assembly lines next to symbols of the most current fads. The commercial market in James Dean products at the beginning of the 90s is estimated to be worth in excess of $1 million a year, more than Dean earned in his lifetime. In all parts of the world, the image is celebrated. These young tourists from Japan visiting a bust of Dean at the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles know exactly the pose to strike for photographs. So do millions of young people who have memorized the posture, the gestures, the mannerisms.
I want to walk like him. I want to talk like him. I memorize every line from every scene. I comb my hair straight back. I remember that like it was my life plan up there on the screen.
These aspiring actors showed up in Hollywood last spring for screen tests to play James Dean himself in a biographical film titled The Legend.
Number 8. And what else did you tell me, sir? Oh, my age, 24.
The image the world knows loomed in gigantic proportions over the scene. If there was room left for other memories, they were hard to find.
I want to play the part of James Dean because it's sort of like becoming a legend in himself.
I still get letters from people and they just idolize the boy.
Yeah, your name and address, phone number. 3712 Beverly Boulevard, number 2, 382.
The energy was enormous, and the hunger.
You need to speak up a little bit.
The Jimmy that I knew was very gentle. Loved animals and loved children and loved old people.
I would like to be in the picture because I don't have anything to do right now at this time.
He was not a rebel at all, really.
A couple reasons why I should play the role of James Dean is because I am James Dean. I've been living it for most of my life. I got lucky in the fact that when I was growing up, people said I looked like James Dean. I think he would get a big kick out of it on a lot of levels because it's something he wanted. It's nice if it's related to the work. I think that's how Jim would like to have been remembered. And the rest of it is nonsense.
Since this year marks the 35th anniversary of James Dean's death, does that mean we're going to be seeing and hearing a lot more of him in this year?
They say that every 5 years, more and more material tends to come out in bursts. So there's a new book coming out that archivists from Warner Brothers have put together called James Dean Behind the Scenes. They're trying to get this movie made. And of course, the commercial value of his name is still, as we heard, an estimated $1 million a year.
$1 million? How do you account for that?
Well, there's a management firm, Curtis Management, out of Indianapolis, that actually handles the rights to license his name and his image on behalf of the family.
Yeah. He was a complex personality because he apparently was different things to different people.
He was, and because he died so young, there was never an element of his personality that we had a chance to see come to the forefront. So it's always a mystery.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob. Well, coming
Great
up...
town here. You know, there are 8 million people standing in line out there to give you their business.
This rare James Dean performance from a television production had not been seen on TV in over 35 years since it was first broadcast live. Before building his legend in Hollywood films, Dean established himself on the small screen first. In the year since his death in a car crash in 1955, the picture most people have of Dean is of a moody, intense loner. But today, through his early work and some long-lost still photos, a new image of Dean is emerging.
Oh, Lucy.
Dean co-starred with Natalie Wood in a production of I'm a Fool. The two would later work together again a year later in Rebel Without a Cause. Eddie Albert also starred in I'm a Fool and recalls that both he and Natalie Wood were impressed with Dean.
Well, I remember Natalie somewhat in awe of him because she was very smart, very, very creative, and she knew talent when she saw it. And he was talent. He was absolutely marvelous.
Dean also appeared as a scientist in a television production starring Rod Steiger.
Oh, you mind if I work a little bit?
But one role that Dean's fans might never have seen him in is in a small bit part in the 1951 Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis film, Sailor Beware. He plays a boxing trainer and speaks his first line of big screen dialogue.
That guy's a professional.
Julie Harris co-starred with Dean in his first starring role in East of Eden. She remembers Dean as a young man with a playful sense of humor.
He always struck me as Tom Sawyer, a boy who was always looking for adventure and to put you off guard. That was the fun in him.
Many other friends of Dean's paint a similar picture of his lighter side. Earl Holliman got to know him on the set of Giant.
He had a lot of humor. He was, I don't know, I think sometimes he was afraid to show it. But Jenny taught me how to mambo. He was even a good dancer.
Dennis Hopper was featured in 2 of Dean's movies and remembers him as a man with many friends and possessing incredible charisma.
When he came to a party and walked into a room, I only saw this with 3 males in my life. I saw it with Marlon Brando and Bob Dylan and James Dean. And they'd come to a party, and when they left the room, half the party would follow them into the next room.
A new book titled James Dean Behind the Scenes features dozens of still photos of the actor taken on a set that have never been published before. The book's authors, Leith Adams and Keith Burns, found the photos sitting in a studio film library. They include the time a shy Dean met his idol Marlon Brando, Dean rehearsing a fight sequence with Rock Hudson for Giant, and many pictures show Dean armed with his own camera, taking pictures of Elizabeth Taylor and snapping shots of action while on the set.
What he was really doing, I think, was studying camera angles, preparing himself to become a director, to become a filmmaker himself.
This is a photo of Julie Harris that Dean took. These other pictures from his camera show that he was looking to capture something different. Now that this rare television footage of Dean and these candid photographs have been discovered, his fans might think of him not just as a rebel, but as an intense young man full of life. The 35th anniversary of James Dean's death is being commemorated with the release on Warner Home Video of his 3 starring films and a documentary about his legend. On our Inside
5, legendary actor James Dean was driving to a road race in his brand new sports car. But then a tragedy occurred. Now, for the first time, a sophisticated scientific investigation uncovers startling new information about the death of a rebel. A myth is exploded, and the truth is uncovered about what happened. Also,
A person comes along who is almost larger than life. Such was the case with James Dean. Before his tragic death in an auto accident, Dean had made only 3 films. He was just 24 years old. Since that September afternoon in 1955, many have assumed that Dean died the way he lived, recklessly, and in the fast lane. But recently we reopened the investigation into his death and learned that millions of people may be wrong. On the afternoon of September 30th, 1955, James Dean and his mechanic left Los Angeles on a trip to a Monterey road race that Dean planned to enter. He was driving a brand new Porsche Spyder, a rare high-performance sports car. Dean's spirits were typically high.
He would have been terribly at home today. He loved to upset the apple cart. He loved to fly in the face of the establishment. There were not people who were that critical, that cynical. He was way out of his time.
Dean was being followed to the races by producer Bill Hickman and photographer Sanford Roth.
I know. Hey,
Hey, there you are. Where you guys been, huh? I've been in your dust about 5 miles back. Well, what are you expecting when you drive a hunk of bolts like that? Where'd you learn to drive anyway? Granny school of driving? Jimmy, let's get some pictures, okay? Okay, let's do it. Let's get it. Sandy, get one of him by himself with the car. Here we go. Oh, leaping lizard for you, the monster. Come on, Ralphie boy, my #1 master mechanic on the scene. Come on, man. I'll make the car run for this man. This is the one. This is the one. Okay, hey, get in here. Get in here. Come on. Okay, why don't you be a part of this show? Sure thing. Proud to be a part of this number here, all right? All right. Guys all ready? Come on, let's go. All right, here we are. Yee! Hey, I got one more for you.
In a short career captured through thousands of photographs, this was the last picture ever taken of James Dean. At approximately 5:15 p.m., the group got back on the road. As Dean neared the intersection of Highway 41 and 466 near Paso Robles, a Ford driven by a local resident was heading in the opposite direction. The sun was low on the horizon. The two vehicles approached the intersection from opposite directions. Then the Ford turned in front of Dean's Porsche. Dean's fragile sports car had been nearly destroyed from the impact. His mechanic was badly injured. The driver of the Ford, though shaken, was uninjured. And James Dean was dead.
To have him snatched away, to end everything in such an abrupt and incredible way was devastating to anyone who knew him and loved him.
Within minutes, Officer Ernest Tripke had arrived on the accident scene and began his official report. For years, it would be considered the last word on what had happened.
Well, we feel that Dean was speeding up to the time of the accident because there was such a tremendous amount of damage to the Porsche, and it spun the Ford completely around, and then the Porsche just kept on going until it finally came to rest in the shoulder.
Take me away, officer. I swear I'm innocent.
Earlier in the day, Dean had received a ticket for going 65 in a 55-mile-per-hour zone. Tripke theorized that Dean was speeding at the time of the accident and had not had time to react. In addition, Tripke felt that the driver of the Ford might not have been able to see Dean, as the silver of his sports car had blended in with the gray of the highway. The inquest ruled that this, coupled with Dean's speeding, had caused the accident.
I was satisfied with the results of the inquest. I had no reason to question any of the jurors, and it's our system, and I felt they did a good job.
But there were unanswered questions that remain to this day. If Dean was speeding, how fast was he going? Was his car really that hard to see? Was the accident his fault? What happened asked failure analysis to go back in time and re-examine the death of a legend. Investigators Gary Cost and Eric Phillips took on the case.
I was in high school when James Dean got killed in this accident. Since he was such a public figure at that time, I found it a very interesting task to take on.
There are both advantages and disadvantages to looking at an accident now that happened almost 40 years ago. Disadvantages are the materials are harder to get, the site may have changed. The advantages are that we can apply techniques for visualizing the accident that weren't even conceivable back in 1955.
In September of 1992, Eric Phillips went to the intersection near Paso Robles in order to recapture the scene. As it was the same time of year as the accident, the light and angle of the sun would help ensure the reconstruction's accuracy. Eric brought sophisticated measuring devices to test the lighting. He wanted to find out whether or not Dean's silver car would have been visible. Back in the office, the accident scene was systematically reconstructed by using Eric's data and aerial photographs taken at the time of the accident.
One of our goals in this recreation was to go back in time to the time when the accident occurred and try to visualize what the accident may have looked like to people at the scene.
To do this, the men took photographs of the site as it appears today and overlaid details from an old photograph. Using this overlay, they recreated the exact features of the highway as it existed almost 40 years earlier. Piece by piece, the real events of September 30th, 1955 began to take shape.
It was eerie for me to investigate this accident that happened 2 years before I was born. The fame of the person involved in this collision was part of that. And in addition, the facts of the incident being quite different than I was led to believe up until I looked at all the materials.
Once all of the data had been collected, the accident scene was recreated inside the computer. For the first time, it was possible to see both drivers' points of view. This is what James Dean may have seen as he entered the intersection. This is what the driver of the Ford might have seen. The investigation concluded that the silver gray Porsche should have been visible to the other driver.
There was no visual obstruction, and there was sufficient contrast and light available to have seen the Porsche for more than a half a mile away.
Through their computer simulations, the men were also able to collide the vehicles over and over again until they wound up where they were in the real accident. Their actual speeds were then determined.
The results of the analysis showed that the speed of the Ford was about 55 miles an hour, and the speed of the Porsche was about 55 to 60 miles per hour, just prior to the collision.
Had Dean been speeding, his vehicle would have traveled much further before it came to a rest. Instead, his final resting place was here.
Which indicates to us that the speed was much closer to the 55 miles an hour that our computer runs corroborate. For all I know, he may have been reckless elsewhere in his life, but at this particular accident, our investigations indicate that he was not behaving recklessly.
The results of these tests have rewritten a myth and partially explained a tragedy.
I think it is understandable why the high-speed version of James Dean's accident was so widely accepted. It was consistent with his image as a young rebel, his persona. And certainly we don't mean to take away from that image, but in point of fact, the evidence shows the accident happened at a lower speed, not atypical of the way you or I drive.
Though James Dean may have lived in the fast lane, his death was just an accident, a needless tragedy that strangely has given him a sort of immortality. What happened? We'll be right back. Homicide. Filming Giant, a movie that traced a man's journey from youth to old age. It's ironic and sad that James Dean never had the opportunity to follow in the footsteps of that final character he had brought to such wondrous life. I'm Ken Howard. Good night.